Hello, welcome to Krachtwerke. And I had a bit of a brain fart yesterday, and I thought to myself, when I try some of the amps, and something I've never done before, because you always see it but never really check it out, is can we use Amplitube or any Amp Simulator VST as an amp head, basically playing it through Guitar Cab. So that's what we're going to do today. That's exactly what we're going to do today. So I was messing around with this yesterday, and I thought that the results are actually fucking insane, right? So I've got to show you this. So I will go through the exact wiring of how all this is set up, so that you can replicate it. There's a few different ways of doing it, and there's not a lot of videos about this online, so I thought this might be interesting. So essentially what we have is we have the guitar going straight into a boost, into a drive pedal. The drive pedal goes straight to the interface. The interface is lined out into, in my case, an effects pedal for any modulation, time, reverb, stuff like that. And that is then fed back into the yo-yo, but just into the effects return. So essentially into the power amp. The yo-yo then is directly connected to the speaker, from the speaker out. So essentially what you have is the yo-yo is really just the power amp, or the amplification. Now what this allows you to do actually, even in live situations, is that it means that you could realistically use Amplitube or any VST amp head, route it to your amp. Let's say in a live situation, you can even have two channels, left and right. You can split left and right up, so the left channel will have no speaker emulation, and it'll be routed into the amp effects return. The other line can have cab simulation on and routed through the other output and straight into the mixing desk of the house, which means that realistically you can completely actually control your sound. What I've also noticed is my machine's fairly fast, so I've got no lag whatsoever, which I think is useful, because if you want to play through an amp, the whole point is that you don't have any sort of kind of digital lag or any sort of pops and clicks or anything like that. So you've got to have a half decent machine. You've got to have, especially if you use things like Windows, you're going to have to make sure that all this stuff is switched off. Any services, ideally also put it in airplane mode or something like that, so you've got nothing working in the background, no antivirus, anything like that. I think there are some things online which explain all the kind of settings that you can mess around with in Windows to make sure that it becomes really reliable and stable. Also, you need to make sure that your machine doesn't go into sleep mode, or the screen doesn't switch off too early, or goes into some sort of hibernation, a power saving method. So I think I'm actually pretty impressed. So what we'll do is we'll show some sound samples, and then we will also show you the diagram, so if anybody's confused about how this was actually wired up, it's not that difficult or complex. They can then try and mimic that. I think so to stick to Amplitube, they have got like this MIDI controller box. So realistically you can do this with that, so you literally have the stomp box and everything running within Amplitube, and you're really just using a power amp and a cab or something like that. In my case, we're going to go through a couple of settings, but essentially you'll see that you can use, so if you theoretically used a MIDI controller to stomp your pedals in, for example, IK Multimedia Amplitube, it means that you can literally use stomp boxes directly from the VST. In my case, because I thought it was really interesting, so that the whole point of this is that to try and retain as much tactile ability, or whatever the word might be. I've actually tested it with normal pedals to see how that works with the digital world, and surprisingly it works just fine. In fact, I could argue that in certain ways it's probably better, because the input of the guitar first hits something analog. In my case, I have a Black Star HT distortion and drive pedal, which means the first contact of the actual guitar tone is a nice high quality valve stage distortion and drive. So I think that actually helps a lot with things like saturation, the whole impedance. I think it helps a lot with the kind of feedback you get, stuff like that. But regardless, we'll see how this goes. Thank you very much. We're going to have some tone samples in a second. So what I'm going to show you is I put it into Reaper for a reason. In Reaper, because I wanted to show you it doesn't just work for Amplitube, it also works for any kind of amp head VST. So we'll start with Amplitube. Now, obviously, you've got to put your recording arming on, and you also need to put your, you need to make sure that it is auditioning. So if you don't know how to do that, check out some details. The other thing is my machine is fairly fast. So if I open my controller here, you can see I'm on 48,000 hertz sample rate. I've got a really low buffer setting. I mean, really low. There's like no lag. So I'll also show you how I'm recording this. I want you to hear roughly what you hear from the amp in the room close by while you're playing with it, so that it also sounds as if it's a sound that you can then also mic up, essentially, if you wanted to. Show you what we're using. We're using this sweet guy. This is the Zoom recorder, and it is set in such a way that it actually records a front and a little bit left and right, so it's kind of like a weird mid-sidey thing that it's recording. I just want to make sure we've got everything running. Yes, so because it's really a pain if things don't record and you've got to do it again. So in Amplitube, one thing that you obviously have to do, because I'm using the cab of this marker, is that you actually need to make sure that your cab is switched off. Otherwise it sounds really... Oh. So cycle through, wanted to show you a few things. Number one, if we use a clean amp, let's go for the standard one, right? That's the clean sound. I never even tuned. Maybe that's the safe mode. I'm not going to be over pedantic with the tuning, I just want it roughly there. Alright, okay. The tuning can... I'll put the safe mode back on just for shits and giggles. So I put mine up to 128 samples and I still don't have any latency whatsoever. So I'm going to go back to this. So now you can hear this is the amp basically. And if I pump up the volume, hear that sparkle of the so-called Fender amp. I'm going to take the spring reverb off and put some distortion. Now obviously you're gonna have to play with your pedals and your EQs on your pedals and your amp to make it sound as good as possible. So again, I'll try and recap. So the guitar goes straight into the overdrive pedals. The overdrive pedals go straight into the interface. The interface is lined out to the effects unit. The effects unit is then put into the back of the effects return of the amp, and the amp is then, you know, speakered out. So it's a guitar speaker cab running. So that's one. Let's actually try the. So this way you also get all the dynamics that you can hope for. Cleans out, rolling back the volume. So you can get your dynamics. Some of the things I thought ended up working really well were some of the high gain amps. This Brett Silver. Another one that works really well with the pedals was the classic. I did put the treble down a bit, I think. Another one which I never liked the sound of inside IK Multimedia is this bastard, the 5150. Suddenly it comes alive. Take the bottom down a bit, put the gain up, push the volume. Boost it. And what I also like is that it actually works really well with the feedback. The feedback sounds fairly nice. It's not that kind of digitally weirdy thing. The other one that sounds fucking amazing is the fucking ENGL. That tight bottom end, man. It sounds brutal as fuck. Boost it. Sorry, that's fucking awesome. The slow, just as good. It's a bit quiet, but it really sounds good. Treble down a bit, presence is too high. And obviously now this one is boosted, pedal is still on. These dynamics are just through the VST, not through the pedals. The pedals are not on. So let's quickly, before this goes weird, let's quickly put some stomp boxes ahead of this. So you can see that we don't need any of these. I'll switch all these effects off. We'll put a, let's put a, you know, I think that the DS1 works so well as a boost on the Mesa book. So that's the distortion. Let's put some stuff in the effects loop because we're not using this one. Let's use a delay and chorus. Fuck you. Where are we? Where are we? Oopsie, 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 oopsie. There's the reverb, digital reverb. We put that before the speaker, obviously. Put the digital delay in the front. Oh, well, we just replaced that. You can see how that works. I'm going to switch this one off and just show you that it works with normal VSTs as well. So in this case, we're using the Crunchman from Nalex, purely just the head. Quieter, but it sounds awesome. This is the power amp. So I'm going to put the power amp on. I think it does a lot. This is the Ignite Amps power amp with front and back, and it works a treat. One of my favorite amp sims is this Crunchman, and also from the same guys. Oh no, I didn't. Let's go for the latex. This is the famous Poulins. They've always been amazing. Again, I'm going to switch the power amp on. So let's use a TS1 in front. Let's put on the, so let's put this in between here. So in between the power amp, I will put on a delay. Anyway, so there you have it. Pretty interesting. There was absolutely at no point any feeling of delay between picking and going. It felt completely natural, but that is due to having a really low rate on my, I'll show you again, the sample rate on my buffer. I can probably bring that down. As you heard, it did work on 64 with the safe mode off. I did hear some clicking, so there are certain technical things that need to be looked out for. If you wanted to use any of these effects, either in, just to reiterate basically, if you wanted to use any of the effects, or the pedals or effects or delays, anything that in the DAW itself or in the likes of Amplitube, you're going to have some sort of external MIDI mixer, a MIDI controller, and that'll work just fine. In my case, I don't, so I just wanted to show you what it sounds like and what you can actually achieve with it and how natural it does sound, and that also normal pedals work within this setup as well, so you don't have to go and chuck your pedals in the bin just yet or put them on eBay. So the next piece, if you have the patience, I will show you the diagrams of how this was all put together. It's actually fairly simple, so please bear with me. So I'll quickly give you an overview of how this was put together. So this was what we were playing through in your VST. You can also run Amplitube by itself. You don't have to use it in the VST. You can run it by itself. I'll show you that in a minute. But realistically, even in this scenario, you can have two, and you can put one left and one right, and then you can output. In most DAWs, you can output to your interface outputs left and right, or how many you have. That can go into one amp, and the other one can go into another amp, which meant you can have a full stereo or even more than stereo effects going. So it all depends on the speed of your laptop and stuff like that. In Amplitube itself, you can manipulate how many tracks, so how many inputs you have. So for example, if I go here, I can have two amps. I can have, well, I've not got the paid version, I've only got the free version with the upgrades through the shop. So that's why I don't have all the stuff happening. But as you can see, you can have routing so that one channel can go to the left output and the other one can go to the right output, which means essentially you can go to two different cabs, which means you can have a full stereo setup. The routing is amazing, and you can do exactly the same in your DAW by basically just, if you go to the routings here, to the hardware send, you can route it to the different outs. Okay, no problem. I will quickly show you the setups. So I made 3 because there's actually 3 or 4 different ways to set this up, right? So this is the simplest way, is you take your guitar, the way I have it is I put it through my pedal board and then into my interface input. All the calculations, everything's done is in the DAW and the VST, and then it is sent to the left out or the right out, whichever, and that then goes straight into the effects in of the amp, which means it bypasses the whole front end of the amp, the whole preamp section. And so you can make decisions within your DAW and your VST. You know, in some of the virtual amps, you can actually set the power section off in the amp, which is good because it means that you can have the amp's kind of power section coloration, if that is the case. In most of these amps, they're just Class D amps and they're just clean, so it doesn't matter. So that's the easy way. So you can also put the guitar straight in and then have all the pedals or something working. Now, I've not noticed any impedance issues or any driving the inputs too hard, but please just look after your inputs and make sure you switch them all down and put the pads in first, so especially when you're using drive pedals and boost pedals, that you don't, you know, obviously pop your inputs, your preamps on your interface. So I could suggest maybe if you've got any issues, any buzzers or hums, anything like that, or you've got any problems, it might be an idea to put a DI box in between the guitar and the inputs, or the pedal board and the inputs, and then you've got some more control over ground lift for any buzzing, any kind of buzzing issues, and you can also then obviously have some control over your signal if it's too hot. The next one is the way I set it up here, is that I've got your pedal board's usually split between 2 anyway. You've got your drive section, and then you've got all your effects, all your kind of time-based and modulation effects separately. And some people would put those into the effects loop anyway, or they would put it between the drive and the amp front. So in this case, I have my pedal board, my drive, which went straight into the input. The interface then did all the amp, preamp information, and power amp to a degree. That was then lined out, typical lined out, but it went back into the pedals that deal with modulation effects, time, reverb, some boost even, etc. If some people like to put their boost in the end of the chain to boost the volume and not the drive necessarily. So you can do all that as you would normally do within an amp. The only thing is there's a VST which sits in between. So this thing goes out back into the effects and just as it would have in any case. The interesting thing is when you come to the stereo setup, you've got exactly the same thing. Now it depends where your stereo starts. Some people have the stereo starting right in front of their pedal chain because they might have stereo choruses or stereo drives or whatever. But essentially here we just have the drive. The drive goes straight into the input. And in the DAW, you do whatever splitting you want, if it's effects or if it's 2 different amps, etc. But obviously those 2 then have to be sent left and right, so that you can then have a left and right signal going into your time-based effects and choruses and modulations and flangers and stuff like that. And that can then be split again into left and right and going into your amp heads. Now, what I was trying to mention earlier is that because you can split signals in the DAW, it means you can have, like, for example, either in your DAW or in your in Amplitube, for example, you can split the amp. So you can have one amp running with speaker emulation, and that line out with the speaker emulation goes straight into the mixing console desk for purposes of back of house, or if you're in a venue or something like that, and they can use that signal to mix. The other signal goes straight to the house's amp backline that they have supplied back into the effects loop, end of story. And you're using your own amp with your own settings, with your own pedals, just using their speaker cab for things like for yourself, for monitoring for yourself, for feedback, for all these kind of things. So it's actually the best of both worlds. Things to look out for to make sure that you've got no delay between picking and the tone, so that it feels absolutely natural. Making sure that your laptop's running smoothly and doesn't switch off or start some sort of, I don't know, porn running on it or whatever, because you never know. You never know. Or antivirus. But there's quite a few things online which will show you how to just set your computer so it's kind of runs as smooth as possible. So I hope this was interesting, because it was quite interesting to me. Now, I didn't do a lot of effort to try mic placement, or when I was going through all the different samples, I wasn't really tweaking those amps again. But obviously, just like in a normal situation, you would be tweaking your amp to sound as best as possible. And when I was playing around with it yesterday, I couldn't fault it. I did a quick test recording through this mic and the placement, and to try and get that rough idea of where it is in the room and how we hear it, and is it micable or not in a live scenario. And I think it works pretty well. I think this is a decent snapshot of what you can do, but obviously I'm trying to give you the wiring and the possibilities, and then you can play with your settings as much as possible, and mic placements and all that, to make it even better. So I hope that was interesting, because I must admit it was fairly interesting to me. Kind of like, why the fuck are we buying amps? Especially with things like dynamics, sag, can all be recreated fairly successfully. And to the person listening, I doubt that they would know the difference after a while. Yet at the same time, I'm quite a fan of having physical analog things in front of me. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe. Just got my 1,000. I would like to start building on top of this 1,000 as much and as quickly as possible. So thanks for watching. Subscribe and like and comment if you have any suggestions. Thank you very much.